Ayesha, a bright Indian girl with dreams of becoming a doctor, and Sheikh Khalid, a powerful Dubai tycoon with a trail of vanished wives. When their worlds collided in a forced marriage, the union promised wealth and status, but ended in terror, secrecy, and bloodshed. Ayesha grew up in a small Indian town surrounded by narrow streets, old houses, and dreams that seemed far too big for a fragile world. From a young age, she carried the weight of her family's hopes. She wanted to study medicine, imagining herself saving lives in a white coat, yet every day her reality pulled her further away from that vision. Her father worked tirelessly but never earned enough to cover debts. Her mother counted coins late at night, whispering prayers for relief. In their eyes, Ayesha was not just a daughter. She was a way out, a chance to bring respect and stability to their struggling home. When a wealthy proposal arrived from Dubai, the family saw it as a miracle. The suitor was Sheikh Khalid, a man of enormous wealth and influence. Stories of his riches flowed through the town like honey, painting a picture of palaces, servants, and a life free from hardship. Relatives celebrated the news, neighbors offered congratulations, and Ayesha was told she was blessed beyond measure. But in the quiet corners of her heart, she felt something entirely different. Her parents dismissed her protests. They reminded her of sacrifices made for her education, of the endless loans and unpaid bills, and of the shame poverty brought upon their family. They insisted this marriage was not just for her, but for all of them. Bound by duty, silenced by pressure, and trapped by love for her parents, Ayesha said nothing more. The preparations moved quickly, leaving her no time to think, no space to breathe. Every new dress, every ornament, every word of praise from relatives became another link in a chain pulling her into a life she never wanted. What others saw as a dream come true, she already felt as a trap closing around her. The day of the wedding unfolded like a spectacle meant to impress rather than to unite two lives. The hall was decorated with golden drapes, crystal chandeliers, and flowers flown in from distant cities, every detail carefully chosen to showcase wealth. Guests poured in wearing sparkling clothes, their eyes fixed on the grandeur rather than the bride herself. Ayesha sat quietly, her hands decorated with henna, her face hidden behind layers of jewelry and makeup. To the crowd, she was the picture of luck and beauty, but inside, her heart pounded with fear she could not put into words. Sheikh Khalid commanded attention the moment he entered. Surrounded by bodyguards and business associates, he carried himself with the authority of someone used to control. He was much older, his eyes sharp and distant, his smile practiced but cold. When he stood beside Ayesha, the contrast was striking, her youth and innocence against his intimidating presence. The rituals were performed swiftly, each chant and prayer binding her tighter to a man she barely knew. Applause and blessings filled the air, drowning out the quiet voice in her mind begging for escape. Her parents, overwhelmed by pride, did not notice her trembling hands. Relatives whispered praises about her good fortune, speaking of the riches and influence that awaited her in Dubai. For them, the wedding was a triumph, proof that their struggles had led to something extraordinary. Yet for Ayesha, every moment felt like a final goodbye to her dreams, her freedom, and her sense of self. By the end of the night, the celebrations left her exhausted. As she prepared to leave her childhood home, she realized she was stepping into a world she could not imagine, a world where her voice no longer mattered and her fate had been sealed in silence. When Ayesha arrived in Dubai, the sight of the palace took her breath away. Towering gates opened to reveal marble floors, endless hallways, and chandeliers that glittered like stars. The air carried the scent of expensive perfumes, and every corner displayed wealth beyond her imagination. To an outsider, it was paradise. To Ayesha, it felt unnatural, as though beauty was being used to disguise something darker. She stepped through the grand doors with hesitation, feeling like a visitor in her own life. Servants bowed politely but avoided her eyes, moving silently as if trained to erase their presence. Their expressions revealed nothing, Yet their careful distance made her uneasy. Locked doors lined many of the corridors, and she was never told what lay beyond them. Each time she asked, Khalid dismissed her with a stern look or a change of subject. The silence inside the palace was heavy, broken only by the echo of her footsteps or the faint sound of doors shutting when she passed. The room assigned to her was lavish, filled with silk curtains and furniture carved in gold. Yet, it felt more like a stage set than a home. She sat on the edge of the bed that first night, listening to the hum of the air conditioning, wondering how a place so full of life could feel so hollow. She had everything she could ever own, but nothing she truly needed. No comfort, no warmth, no freedom. The longer she stayed, the more she sensed unseen eyes watching her. Servants whispered in corners, conversations stopped when she entered, and she caught glimpses of shadows moving where no one should be. The palace was not simply a house of riches. It was a place of secrets, and she was its newest prisoner. It did not take long for Ayesha to sense that her new husband carried a darkness no wealth could hide. At first, she dismissed the unease as fear of the unknown, but soon the whispers began. Quiet remarks from servants, stories half finished before someone fell silent. Hints dropped like warnings she was never meant to hear. The more she listened, the clearer the truth became. Khalid's past was filled with shadows that no one dared to speak about openly. Rumors surrounded the fates of his former wives. 3 women had been married to him before Ayesha, each vanishing without a trace. Official explanations were vague. One supposedly returned to her homeland, another was said to have fallen ill, and the third simply disappeared overnight. There were no records, no visits, no calls, only silence. The palace staff spoke of them in hushed tones, their voices laced with fear, as if even mentioning the women could bring punishment. Ayesha's mind raced with questions. What had happened to them? Why had no one investigated? And most importantly, would she meet the same end? The glances exchanged among the servants told her more than their words ever could. She noticed how some avoided certain hallways at night, how doors remained locked, and how the air grew heavier whenever Khalid's name was mentioned in connection to the past. The Sheikh himself never spoke of his marriages. When he looked at Ayesha, it was not with affection but possession, as if she were another acquisition to display, not a partner to cherish. She realized she was not a bride at all, but a replacement, one in a line of women who had been silenced before her. The palace was haunted, not by ghosts, but by the unspoken fate of those who had come before. The palace that once seemed vast and overwhelming soon became a carefully constructed prison. Ayesha discovered that every aspect of her life was controlled. Her phone, gifted by Khalid, had numbers preloaded but no way to contact her family directly. Whenever she tried to write letters home, they were collected by staff with promises to send them, yet no replies ever came. She began to suspect they never left the palace at all. The walls of luxury tightened around her, stripping her of any connection to the outside world. Her daily routine was dictated without her consent. Meals were chosen for her wardrobe selected by others, and her outings carefully monitored. She was allowed in the palace gardens, but only under the watchful eyes of guards. Whenever she asked to explore beyond the gates, Khalid would remind her of her duty and dismiss her wishes with cold authority. The more she tried to carve out a piece of freedom, the more invisible chains were wrapped around her. Isolation began to erode her spirit. Days blurred into nights with no joy, no laughter, no human connection. The servants treated her with formality, but not warmth, always careful not to cross invisible boundaries. She was surrounded by people, yet utterly alone, her voice swallowed by the emptiness of gilded halls. Even her reflection in the ornate mirrors no longer felt familiar. The sparkle in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by a quiet resignation. The girl who once dreamed of studying medicine now barely recognized herself. The palace consumed her identity bit by bit, until all that remained was silence and fear. Ayesha realized that wealth had not elevated her. It had buried her under layers of control, leaving her a prisoner disguised as a bride. In the middle of her despair, Ayesha found one fragile way to keep herself alive: her secret diary. It began with scraps of paper stolen from the study, hidden carefully beneath the lining of her dresser drawer. At first, she wrote simple thoughts, short sentences about missing home and the loneliness that pressed against her like a weight. But slowly, the pages filled with the raw truth of her daily life, each word etched with fear and courage. She wrote about the coldness in Khalid's eyes, about the silent corridors that seemed to watch her every move, about the suffocating rules that dictated what she ate, where she walked, and how she dressed. The diary became her only confidant, the only place where her voice existed without consequence. Every entry was a protest, a reminder that despite the prison she lived in, her mind was still her own. The act of writing gave her a sliver of strength. She began recording details that could one day expose the Sheikh's cruelty: names of servants who vanished, times when doors were locked without reason, and moments when she overheard fragments of conversations not meant for her ears. Each page was both a release and a risk, for if discovered, it would seal her fate. The more she wrote, the more she clung to the idea that her words might outlive her, that they could travel where she could not. In the quiet hours of the night, she poured her soul onto paper while the palace slept, her pen scratching softly against the silence. The diary was more than a record. It was her rebellion. In a world where her voice had been stolen, these hidden pages were her only proof that she still existed, that she had not surrendered completely to fear. Ayesha's days of silence shifted the moment she met Layla, a young maid who moved quietly through the palace like a shadow. Unlike the others, Layla did not lower her gaze in fear whenever their paths crossed. Instead, there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, as if she saw the same trapped soul reflected back at her. It began with fleeting exchanges, passing smiles, quick glances, but soon whispers in empty corridors carried secrets too dangerous to say aloud in the open. Layla had lived in the palace for years, bound by circumstances she never chose. She revealed fragments of her own story, of how she had once dreamed of freedom but had been forced into servitude with no escape. With careful words, she shared what no one else dared to speak: that Ayesha was not the first bride to feel caged here. The vanished wives, the locked rooms, the unexplainable silences. Layla hinted at horrors buried behind the palace's glittering walls. Trust grew slowly, fragile as glass, but it gave Ayesha something she had lost: hope. Layla showed her hidden passageways used by servants, narrow staircases concealed behind panels, and corridors that bypassed the watchful eyes of guards. For the first time, Ayesha glimpsed a possibility beyond the golden prison. The two began to plan in secret, speaking in hushed tones only when certain they were alone. Every detail was dangerous to even imagine, but desperation fueled them. Ayesha knew the risks were immense. Failure could mean punishment or worse, but remaining silent meant certain ruin. In the bond they formed, Ayesha found the courage to dream again. The walls still towered around her, the locks still held, but for the first time since her arrival, she believed there might be a way out, however perilous. The night Ayesha chose to escape was drowned in heavy rain, the kind that blurred the palace walls and hid footsteps beneath thunder. Every step felt like betrayal, every shadow a warning. She clutched the instructions Layla had whispered, her hands trembling as she moved through hidden corridors meant only for servants. Behind a panel near the kitchens lay the passage that promised freedom. Her heart beat so violently she feared it would echo through the stone. But Khalid had been watching her for weeks. He sensed her restlessness, noticed the way her eyes lingered on locked doors, the way silence turned sharper around her. As lightning flashed, Ayesha pushed open the concealed exit, only to hear heavy boots behind her. Before she could run, guards seized her, their grip unyielding. Her cries were swallowed by the storm as they dragged her back through the corridors she had dared to challenge. Khalid was waiting. His fury burned colder than fire. Without a word, he led her into the underground chamber, a place whispered about but never seen. The air was damp, walls pressing in like a tomb, a single dim light flickering overhead. Servants later recalled the noises, screams muffled, furniture crashing, the storm outside masking what truly happened below. No one dared intervene. Silence was survival. Then suddenly it ended. Hours of chaos gave way to a quiet heavier than thunder. By morning, Ayesha was gone. Her room was spotless, her belongings neatly arranged, as though she had been erased overnight. The golden halls gleamed as always, but beneath them, hidden in the earth, lay the mark of a night when courage was crushed by power and a life ended in darkness. The morning after Ayesha's disappearance, the palace resumed its routines as though nothing had happened. Servants moved quietly through the halls, their faces carefully blank, their eyes avoiding one another. Khalid announced calmly that Ayesha had returned to India for studies, his voice steady and unquestionable. To outsiders, it sounded like a generous decision from a wealthy husband, but inside the palace, no one dared to believe it. The silence that followed his words was more terrifying than the screams from the night before. Every trace of Ayesha was erased with frightening precision. Her clothes were removed from the wardrobe, her diary vanished from its hiding place, and even her photographs were taken down. It was as if she had been an illusion, a fleeting presence in a palace that tolerated no memory of the women who had come before. When servants asked timidly about her belongings, they were met with cold stares or veiled threats. The message was clear: Ayesha never existed here. Layla, the maid who had once whispered hope into her ear, disappeared shortly after. No explanation was given, no farewells exchanged. Her absence deepened the fear among the staff, who now moved through the palace like shadows, careful never to attract Khalid's attention. Whispers of rebellion were silenced, and even glances of pity toward the locked chambers were avoided. Outside the palace, Khalid's influence ensured that no questions reached him. Officials recorded her departure without evidence, her name struck from local records, her marriage reduced to a rumor too fragile to stand against his power. With wealth and authority protecting him, the truth of Ayesha's fate was buried. But within the walls of the palace, the servants carried the weight of knowing. They lived in fear, haunted by the unspoken secret of the bride who vanished overnight. Years passed, and Ayesha's name faded from memory outside the palace. New celebrations, new ventures, and new displays of Khalid's wealth drowned out whispers of the girl who had once arrived with hopeful eyes. Yet within the walls of the palace, her presence lingered. Servants avoided certain corridors, especially the one leading to the underground chamber. Some claimed to hear faint sobs echoing late at night. Others swore they saw shadows move where no one should be. The silence around her fate grew into a legend, carried quietly from one servant to another, a warning for those who entered Khalid's world. The truth emerged only by accident. During renovations years later, construction workers uncovered a sealed space beneath the palace. Dust filled the air as heavy stones were pried loose, revealing an abandoned chamber. Inside lay fragments of fabric, brittle with age, and a bracelet engraved with Ayesha's initials. Stains on the floor told a story no one dared to say aloud. The discovery spread quickly, igniting rumors that had been buried for too long. Though whispers reached beyond the palace, Khalid's influence was still powerful. Officials dismissed the findings as remnants of a forgotten storeroom. Reports vanished, and witnesses were silenced. No charges were brought, no justice pursued. The truth remained locked behind walls of power and fear. Yet the legend of Ayesha refused to die. Her story became a haunting tale told in hushed voices, of a young bride forced into a gilded prison, of courage crushed by control, of secrets hidden beneath marble floors. Some claimed her spirit wandered the palace still, searching for the freedom she was denied in life. Though her body was silenced, her memory endured, a chilling reminder of how power can erase lives, but never the truth that lingers in shadows.